Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of iWorkinSport live interview. This is the show where we talk to accomplished sport business professionals who come here to share their knowledge, their experience, tips, and advice in order to help you succeed in your career. So, my name is João Frigerio. I'm the founder of iWorkinSport, and I just want to start by thanking you for being here with us, actually, because I have a guest that will join us in a second. Please let me know if this is your first time here or if you're coming back. As you know, it's always great to know if you are coming back and where you're watching from. That would be great to know. Let us know in the comments. If you're watching the replay as well, please feel free to leave a comment and let us know. If you don't know iWorkinSport, we're a platform to help you boost your career in sport. So if you want to work in sport or if you already work in sport, we're there for you either way. We mostly organize events which connect you with recruiters if you're looking for a job, or with sports management academic programs if you're interested in investing in education. These programs can be a very effective way to enter the industry, which, by the way, I need to have something here, or there you go. There it is. We have an event coming up. It's the Education Virtual Expo. It's entirely free. 2 days happening on the 27th of October and the 3rd of November. And this is a great occasion for you to meet leaders in this academic space, some of the best programs in the world, for you to go and enhance your education in sport. So in addition to YouTube, where you may be watching this, and on LinkedIn, we're also on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. You can find us everywhere at iWorkinSport. On LinkedIn, we also have a community, a group where you can exchange ideas with people like you. Many of you will have the same interests. Because it's a community, instead of iWorkinSport, we call that We Work in Sport. So look for that. We Work in Sport on LinkedIn. I think enough introduction now. I actually need to introduce my guests now. So for over a decade, Matt Rogan has been a leading figure in the sports business industry, as he co-founded Two Circles, a sports marketing agency that uses data to grow direct relationships with sports and fans. At the time, the company innovated on how they treated consumer data and how they helped their clients leverage on that. We will learn a bit more about what's special about Two Circles. Although he's not acting there at the moment, he's a founder and still sits on the board. They actually grew quite fast, and in less than 10 years, they were acquired twice. First time quite early on by WPP, and later on, not so long ago, by Bruin Capital. So we'll talk about creating a company from scratch, from his kitchen table, I heard, and growing it to hundreds of employees, millions in revenues. But we'll also dive into the beginning of his career. Matt has worked for the NBA, for sport as well, and I would really like to know how he started, how that all started. And of course, we'll talk about the book that he has recently launched. It's called All to Play For. There's a link in the description if you want to buy a copy, but we'll talk a lot about that in a second. So I will invite Matt to join me. Let me find the right button, actually right after this. Matt, hello. Welcome to the show. How are you?
Hi there. Thank you very much for having me from, I think you're in Portugal, aren't you? And I'm in just about still warm England, just outside Oxford.
I am. Could you hear me okay? I know that I was breaking up a bit before. I'm
Yeah.
in a new apartment, as you mentioned. I just moved here to Portugal. So yeah. Listen, thanks a lot for being here. I'm just checking some messages that are coming in. We'll address them in a minute. And Matt, before actually we start, there's so many questions. I think there's so much to talk about. But maybe let's start with a summary of your career. So maybe what did you study and how did you start working in sport?
Right. Okay. So set in context, I'm 46 now. So I live with my wife Claire and two kids, 14 and 11. If either of them appear over there through the door, it's because they've just come in from school and forgotten that I'm on this video. So you may meet them at some point. I started at university. I studied German and French, actually. I was told I spoke French like a footballer by one of the professors, which wasn't necessarily a good thing because it was the era where David Beckham was at Paris Saint-Germain. So I studied French and German, a lot of history, a lot of linguistics. I taught for a year in Germany as part of my degree. So I taught English in Hamburg for a year. The reality of that background was it was a fantastic degree. It taught me to communicate, but I'm not sure it really taught me much, if anything, about business. And so there I was, a kind of a communicator in several languages, but I didn't really understand much about business. And so I decided straight after university that consultancy would be a good background for me to start with, because it would teach me to basics of financial management, balance sheet management, structuring my thinking and articulating a good argument, learning about all sorts of different industries as well. So my first project was in logistics. My second was in biscuits. And so I wasn't in the sports space at all. But the business I worked for was quite small. It's about 35, 40 people. There were two partners from a consultancy called McKinsey and two from a consultancy called Bain who'd set the business up, gone on their own and set the business up. And I just tried to make a name for myself as the guy who was interested in the sport business, which in 1997, this was still quite new. The Premier League was just dawning in England, which really created a new era of commerce for sport. And I tried to make my own luck. So I left lots of books about the early stage of the sports business on my desk, even when I was working on biscuits. And I luckily we got some work in entertainment with Disney, and I was put on that because I was the only one who understood anything about entertainment. And then a broadcaster came to us who was interested in buying a piece of a Premier League team, Newcastle. And again, I was the only one who they could see understood that space or tried to understood that space. So I got put on that project. And that was an amazing 6 months of learning, trying to value 10% of Newcastle United. And then the project finished and I was put back onto glass bottle manufacturing.
Did they buy that stake in the club in the end?
Yes, yeah. So it was a company called NTL who were competing with Sky for broadcast rights.
Right.
And so for the new Premier League. And so I then got put back on a fairly basic project for glass bottles, but I'd seen what I wanted to do with my career by that point. So I wasn't really interested in glass bottles. So at that point, I had some decent experience. I understood sport. I knew how the Premier League broadcast rights were working, and I managed to find a role at the NBA. So they were 3 people. I was the 3rd person for the NBA in London when the headquarters was in Paris. Spent 2 years there, nearly 3 years there, and then jumped to MTV. So again, using the entertainment experience. So MTV, when it was in the point of internationalizing, MTV was brilliant. It was culturally very different working in music. But
when was that you went to?
That would have been 2001, about 2001, 2002. And that was the period where MTV Music Awards were everywhere. MTV was launching channels in local markets. So my languages, as well as my understanding of the industry, stood me in good stead. So and MTV was brilliant because it didn't care how old you were. In fact, if it was a problem if you were too old at MTV, it wanted people across the business who as close to the age group of the viewer as possible. And so I got promoted quite quickly at MTV. Did 7 years, did 4 years, and I was exhausted. It was quite a hard life, lots of travel, lots of partying, and at that point went to run a professional service business, so a leadership development business that works on training and leadership, management support. That was the best of sports and Olympic sport into business. So how do you handle pressure, set goals? How do Olympians sleep? How do they manage their nutrition to be brilliant on the day? And how can business people learn from that? And I was basically running the business age 32, I think. Yeah. 31, 32, which is brilliant experience. I worked for the gentleman who was managing director, was a gold medal winning swimmer, a guy called Adrian Morehouse. Wow. I learned an awful lot from, and he won best leader in the UK twice in a row. And so I learned a lot from him, but I was never going to run that business. Sadly, I have no gold medals. There are no gold medals behind me, just memories, but no gold medals. And so at some point, I wanted.
Although I heard you were quite good, you were a quite good athlete as well.
Not really. I love my tennis, love my football, love my running now, but distinctly amateur. Anyway, I learned so much from Adrian. At some point, I figured I wanted to run my own business. So, age 36, set up 2 circles, taking me back into the sports space.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Just before we jump into 2 circles, let me just shout out to a few people that are already leaving some messages here. If you see me checking my phone, some of the people don't appear their names there, so I need to check on the actual LinkedIn stream. So Shio John in India says hi. This was Amanda in Paris. Hello, Amanda. Saruka, who you know, saying hello from India. We have Gabriel in Brazil. Yeah, John was Sergio was just commenting that you're at the right place at the right time at that time. And we also have Katrina Galas here saying, can't wait to read your new book.
Thank you.
Matt. Oh, so let's already start with a question. And normally I keep the questions to further back in the end. So we'll jump to that, and then we're going to talk about 2 circles. So what would you say is the most critical reality to acknowledge about the future of sport, and where does women's sport fall in your predictions? So maybe if you want to keep the first one more to the end, because we're going to talk about that, but if you want to address the women's sports prediction right now, maybe we can do that.
Okay, so firstly, thank you, and nice to be in touch, Katrina. Women's sports is absolutely fundamental to my predictions and my view of where sport goes next. It feels, so I'm sat here in England, and it feels faintly ridiculous to think about a world even 2 or 3 years ago where people would talk about the England football team or the England cricket team and not need to say the England men's football team or the England women's football team. And that's a reflection of how quickly sport has slightly embarrassingly realized that that there are two genders that are just as passionate, just as driven both to play and watch sport, and indeed a lot of the future in terms of both commercial opportunity and healthcare opportunity exists in the female side. One example, which has been a real lesson actually for the industry in England this summer, has been a cricket tournament called the 100, and cricket is about as traditional an industry and a sport as you could possibly find, maybe even globally, and yet they have for the first time given women's professional cricketers absolutely equal billing, both in terms of when the event happens, but in the prize money, in the competitions that go on BBC television in the evenings. And it's been a complete revolution. And actually, most of the stories, most of the broadcast coverage, certainly most of the interest of the commercial partners has been in the female side of the sport. I know for a fact that there are more approaches to sponsor the national team for soccer in England now for the women's team than the men's team, and that's what happened in the last 2 or 3 years. And the understanding how we tailor and position sport for both genders is absolutely fundamental, as is understanding that female sport doesn't have to look like men's sport, doesn't have to be positioned like men's sport.
No, something, on its own. We also have Alexandre Diaz saying hi here in Portugal. And
hey, Rebecca, as well. I know exactly.
Here we have Rebecca, yeah. Awesome answer, Matt. Still way to go in women's sports and nomenclature, but nice to see it changing, as you say. Thank you for being with us, Rebecca. Matt, about so let's go to you founding or co-founding Two Circles. So explain, maybe, I mean, we know Two Circles as a sports marketing agency. I know you have an emphasis in data, but maybe what differentiates Two Circles from other agencies? Maybe we can start there.
Okay, so we started with quite a blank sheet of paper with Two Circles, even though I've been in the industry for sort of 10, 15 years or so before we set up. All we knew was that traditional sports marketing agencies weren't really addressing some of the problems that were being seen in the domestic English UK market. So, for example, the Olympic Games was just around the corner, so we were kind of a year away from the Olympic Games. The organising committee were selling sponsorships based on profit and loss accounts of what it would do to a sponsor's business, with real hard business expertise. And the sports marketing agencies of the day were saying, that's great, we'll run some events and some workshops and put some branding up and all sorts of things which were part of sport, part of a business transaction, but weren't the whole answer. And so we said, well, look, how do we build a business, a sports marketing agency, with evidence and hard rigor at its core, a little bit like the strategy consultancy, the ex-McKinsey strategy consultancy that I'd said being part of 10 years before. And so we said, well, we think that needs three components. Okay, so in order to be credible at the board table, we need to be able to explain arguments and think and structure our solutions just like a McKinsey consultant or a Bain consultant or an Accenture consultant. Okay, number one. Number two, we need to be able to not base our decisions on research and 100 people think this or 200 people think this. We need to base it on real people and real behavior, because this was an era where, big data, for example, was a topic of conversation, very misunderstood, but a topic of conversation. So we said, well, we need to think properly, incredibly at board level. We need to explain and be able to evidence the work we do in terms of real people's behavior. And thirdly, we need to be able to change behavior ourselves, not wait for it to happen. So we need to be a proper digital marketing agency as well.
Right.
And so we built a proposition for Two Circles that was all three of those things. We were a management consultancy, a data and analytics business, and a digital marketing agency in one. And we built those three together because sport are big brands, sports businesses are big brands, but actually they're very small businesses, right? So when we started working with Manchester City, for example, one of our first clients, they're a really big brand, known the way around the world, but their revenue was the same as the average mid-sized shop on Oxford Street in London, just that branch.
Yeah.
Right. So they don't have and still don't have the budget to hire McKinsey, hire an analytics firm, and hire a digital marketing agency. So we needed to be all three in one. And Two Circles for the first 10 years was really just depending on the solution that our clients needed. We could use any one or a blend of those skill sets. That was the proposition, and the strategic decision we made from the start was to say we are only going to work for rights holders.
Right.
Everybody said we were mad.
Apparently not.
Well,
and how was the process of then creating this agency from scratch? Because you were not coming from the sports industry per se. You had worked at the NBA, then you went to MTV, but it's not like at the time you were a veteran. You see many agencies being created by people that stayed at Sport 5 for 10 years or 20 years, have the accounts, have the context, and then when they leave, people trust that person and they go and they meet, they build their own agency. Yours was a bit different. So how was that process?
So I think in terms of being known in the industry and things, I was still a board director of the European Sponsorship Association. So I still spent a bit of time in the industry. And in fact, I was running the learning program for the industry at the European Sponsorship Association. So I still had a lot of friends in it. And so that was helpful. One of my co-founders, Gareth Balch, who's chief executive to this day, was head of commercial strategy at Manchester City. So he was absolutely immersed in data science as relates to the Premier League, which was helpful as well. And I think actually, in some ways, if I'd been at Sport 5 or I don't know, any CSM or any of the other big agencies, it would probably have been harder to start Two Circles. Not because there's anything wrong with those agencies, but because we were trying to bring something fresh and different to the market. And it's quite hard to be fresh and different if you're already used to one way of doing things. So in our first 100 hires in Two Circles, we hired, I think, 6 people who were from sport. Only 6. Now, we might have hired people who worked in sport and then gone somewhere else and were coming back in. But it was for exactly that reason. We wanted to challenge the status quo. And so we were looking for people with different kind of backgrounds to come in and help us do that.
Right. And, well, you mentioned about your first 100 hires. I think now Two Circles has what? So is that nearly 300 people? Or?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
And how was it? I mean, how was this rapid growth process?
So I think it was actually quite consistent. So effectively, we hired the best part of 200 people in 5 years, first 5 years. Maybe 20 or 30 of those decided to move on at some point. So effectively, to have 200 in the business in 5 years' time, you've probably hired 220, 230 people. And those people who our numerator will be thinking, well, that's one every week and a half, one person every week and a half. And so in order to do that effectively, it has to be your complete priority. And so I took the lead on recruitment. And so to hire one person a week, one person every week and a half, I was probably interviewing 2 people a day, every day, at a first round stage. And then, of course, Gareth or Claire would interview people as a second round stage. And so, frankly, it just becomes your absolute priority. And you learn very quickly that you're not hiring for capability as much as you're hiring for attitude. So there were many more people that we talked to who might have been leaving or wanting to leave a Procter & Gamble or a Unilever or an Accenture or a McKinsey, who could do the skill of the analytics, do the skill of the data integrations. That was the easy bit. It was having the emotional intelligence and the listening skills and the right brain as well as the left brain to translate those skills into sport. That was what characterized the people we actually hired. And as a business that's growing that quickly, you go through different stages. So up to 20 people, you're quite fluid, you're quite alive. You know what's going on for your team outside of their work as well. You know, if they've moved house, you know, if they've just bought a cat, you know, all sorts of daft stuff. You probably know their partners as well. And then 20 to 50, you'll have to put a bit more process and structure into things. So by that point, obviously you still know everyone, you know their characters and things, but you might not know their cat or their partners. There's a bit, and you might have an operations manager or something like that. And by 50 to 100, it's getting a bit hard to manage, but you make sure you spend time with everyone. Maybe you can't do quite as many one-to-ones. And then 100 onwards, that's when you start feeling like a real business for good and for bad.
I see. Well, I actually have 2 questions on that topic. One is quite silly. So I'll leave the silly one for for later. But I understand that creating a business and growing is probably 2 different beasts.
Yeah.
Right. Still on the founding one, creating and solidifying a business. Still hope to grow my own. But can you maybe explain what are the sort of the main differences and what it's needed for each of those, or how was it different for you when you're creating 2 circles, and then when you realize that's what you needed to do was to grow? Can you do that without investment, or when do you went after? Did you go after it? Maybe you can share insight there.
So we were really clear right from the beginning that there will come a point where we'd need investment at some point, but we didn't think we needed it at the beginning. And so we kind of hunkered down, didn't pay ourselves for a few months. We're lucky to have clients early on. For example, the England World Cricket Board were brilliant to us. And so we managed to do without any investment. And that period of, I would say for 2 years, I would say we felt like we were creating, by which I meant we're testing a proposition and tweaking a proposition, testing the technology and perfecting that. And it wasn't just the main thing that characterizes the difference. When we were creating and testing, we were not just testing whether we could sell work. We were testing whether we could deliver work brilliantly so the clients were happy and came back. We were testing whether we could afford people to do the work and whether those people enjoyed it and wanted to stay with us. We were testing how the market perceived what we were doing, whether it could get its head around it. And it was really only, we probably had 15 people in the business and we were still testing. We'd set ourselves some goals that said, right, in 3 years, unless we're turning over this amount of money, we've got this number of happy people, this number of happy clients, then we need to get a sensible job again and stop dreaming. And it was only once we could validate all of those things. Not just we could sell work, but we could sell work that clients loved when we delivered it, that the market understood us, that our team were happy. When we could tick all those boxes, that's when we went into, right, this works. Now we need to put our foot down.
Right.
Gareth was telling the story recently, actually, about there came a point at a board meeting that I still remember too, where we decided to go from 20 to 40 people. And that was the crux of us. And we were only going to do that once we were comfortable that every bit of the model worked. I think too many agencies too many businesses sort of walk before they can run before they can walk. So because they can sell work, they assume there's a business there. Yeah. But I think it's more subtle than that.
Right. Cool. I want to remind everyone there's a few more comments coming in. If you would like to prepare and send your question as well, Matt will be answering your questions. So there's Carl here saying hi from Lima in Peru. Gabriela also on LinkedIn in Brazil. Mamet Paulo, special audience, also in Brazil. And there was also Marco Escudero watching on LinkedIn. Don't know where he is watching from. So I will ask everyone to prepare your questions. If some good questions come, there may be a surprise in the end to you. So your participation is welcomed. And if you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to hit that like button as well. Subscribe if you're interested in this kind of content. Matt, before we move on, my silly question was, why the name Two Circles?
So that's not a silly question. The truth is, Gareth wanted to call the business Circles. And that was because when Gareth was talking to girls in nightclubs when he was growing up, it's a true story. Girls used to say to him, "What do you do for a living?" And Gareth at the time ran 800 meters for Britain. So he used to say, "I run around in circles."
All right.
And I said to him, "We should definitely set this business up, but Circles is an awful name. It sounds more like a bad TV show." And so we sort of thought about it over a pizza. And I said, "Well, what about Two Circles? Because 800 meters is two circles."
Yeah.
My sports are football and tennis, so two balls. But more interestingly, to us, it described the problem we were trying to solve, because you had the sport here and the fan here as two separate circles, and the sport was frustrated because it didn't understand more about the fan, and the fan was frustrated because it felt locked out from understanding the sport. And so our job was to turn two circles into one. So like all classic branding stories, there's a true story, i.e. I don't want to call it a bad TV show name, and then we kind of post-rationalize a sensible business story.
All right. Okay. Good to know. Before we move on to talk about the book and also a few other things that you do, I just want to mention I was, studying a bit before, coming to this talk, and read a few things, and also watched or listened to a few podcasts. And then I think when you're talking about the growth of the business, that I thought super interesting is you said that you have a strategy when you say no to things.
Yeah, absolutely right.
And that's really sort of, it stuck with me. So
yeah, and for us, there were a few examples of that. We knew our strategy was to make a mark and lead the UK, create the market and lead the UK in 3 years. And that meant we were approached by an international federation from Switzerland, and we said, no, we're not ready to do that well, because it would have taken one of Gareth or I out the UK entirely. We were approached by some brands, so sporting brands, sponsors, and we said, no, we work for rights holders. It's really hard because, they'd have paid us much more than the rights holders, but those moments of keenness to focus on what we do and doing that well were absolutely the making of the business.
Right. Yeah, no, I found that very interesting. I took notes. And there's just a few more hellos here. There is that Jonathan de Graaf says great insights.
Question there as well.
Any top tips for small sporting brands starting up?
I understand by that. I think sort of a clothing brand, like a Nike, Adi type clothing brand. I think the main insight for any business in sport, I would say, and in particular clothing brands, is it is much, much, much easier to grow when you retain the customers you've got, rather than trying to find new ones, and you become, rather than being a bit of a leaky bucket. So you get a customer once and disappear. And so fundamentally, I think most businesses nowadays also grow via word of mouth, and that word of mouth is driven by digital. And so if you have an extra £1 to spend at any point, spend it on the quality of your product. I believe that's fundamental to any startup business, and that's what we did at Two Circles. The business that's done that best, if he is interested in clothing brands, the UK, there's a clothing brand that's launched about 3-4 years ago called Castore, which is quite a high-end clothing brand. And I bought one piece of clothing from Castore. Andy Murray's an investor, and I'm a big Andy Murray fan. And about every 6 to 9 months, I get a posted letter from the chief exec of the business, founder of the business, Andy Murray, telling me how it's going. I didn't ask for it; he just does it. And I might get a money off voucher or something like that. And that intimacy and focus on customer loyalty, I think, is the making of any credible business in sport nowadays.
That's a great insight as well. Here there's Hakon in Oslo, Norway, saying hello. And there's a few that don't show their LinkedIn names on my phone. I can see that Marsha Boyce says that's a really insightful backstory for the company name. So she liked the story there.
The truth.
the truth. Before we talk about the book, you currently hold a position at the English Institute of Sport. So just tell us a bit of what that is and what is it that you do, please.
So yeah, I love it. I mean, I've spent the majority of my time, as I've explained, in the commercial side of sport. And the English Institute of Sport is not known to many people, but it's the organisation that's responsible for all the sports medicine, sports technology, sports science, and sports psychology of the British Olympic and Paralympic teams. So, for example, if you've been watching in Tokyo, you'd have seen English Institute of Sport psychologists working with track cyclists before they go out to take part in their race. You'd have seen a bike that the English Institute of Sport was responsible for co-creating with British cycling. It's a fascinating organisation, and what it's taught me in terms of its application to this conversation is a lot of the skills that are important to work in the performance side of sport are absolutely identical to the commercial one. It's you're being focused on results, having a good plan, having the emotional intelligence to persuade people that your idea is a good idea. It's the same stuff, it's just on the performance side. So I sit on the board there. I'm responsible for supporting and challenging the management team, and I love it.
Great. I wasn't really familiar with it. So since I found in my research, I thought that we should share that here too with the audience. I recommend they take a look at it. And you also contribute with Sports Pro, right? We had Nick Mitchum here a few episodes ago, maybe last season.
So actually that relates a little bit to the question I saw coming up from the LinkedIn user at 438. So my work at Sports Pro wasn't planned. What I found when I stepped back from Two Circles, as we entered the pandemic, I got a lot of calls from chief executives and leaders in sports businesses whose businesses have always grown because sports rights, broadcast rights have always gone up. Ticket prices have always gone up. So revenue from the stadium has always gone up, even if there haven't been more seats in the stadium. And they said to me, I'm not really sure how to manage a business that isn't growing. I've never had to do that before. And so what I decided to do with Nick and the team at Sports Pro was just spend some time, because I'm not involved in Two Circles, trying to create some learning materials for senior leaders in sport who they might not have been lucky to start in a strategy consultancy. They might have started in sport straight out of school. So they've never had any formal training or formal development. And so we tried to create a set of materials and podcasts and things that they could listen to or read and get some learning from. And hopefully it's been really helpful. So we created a document last year called the CEO Playbook, which you can still download for free on the Sports Pro website. None of it's charged for. It's just an attempt to help people working in sport in this challenging time. To answer the question on the pandemic as relates to Two Circles, the reality is their business has sped up. And the reason for that is because in a world where there are no events, in a world where you don't have that opportunity to meet your supporters, meet your fans face to face, where there maybe isn't even any broadcasts to show yourself to the customers, the only thing you have is that direct relationship with the customer and the ability to talk directly to them through the data that you hold on your audience. And so it's been a wake-up moment for those in the industry maybe who were slightly behind, that they had to sort of sort themselves out in that regard. And so Two Circles business, supported, of course, by having Bruin Sports Capital as an investor now with more investment in international markets, has grown very, very quickly indeed.
Right. Yeah. So that question, just so you know, was from Marsha J. Boyce, the one that we put on the screen.
Okay.
And there's a comment here saying that Mamé Paulo misses my jerseys from my wall that I had in my apartment in Lausanne. It's a new place. I couldn't bring the frames.
All about soccer, really. I haven't got any either, I'm afraid.
But do you have your book in hand? Because I would like to talk about that.
Yeah. There we go.
So you're launching the book, All to Play For, how sport can reboot our future.
There we go.
So maybe I should start there. So how can sport reboot our future?
Oh, it took me 85,000 words to answer that question.
No, just a summary. I have a few others.
I'm kidding. We can't be here all night. So basically, the hypothesis of the book is to say we need to join up sports. So at the moment, you and I and everyone on this call probably understands that if we are active, we are healthier, and if we're healthier, then that's good for us individually. It's good for our society. We probably understand, many of us, that if we go for a run or go for a walk before we start our working days, we're more productive. We probably understand as well that I'm too old to spend my time in cities, in bars and clubs anymore, but so are future generations, and that actually the way we think about our cities and plan our cities needs to change in a world where maybe we don't need as much retail in the heart of our cities anymore, and we might be able to have newer generations who want more climbing walls than nightclubs as ways to spend their time. We might need to think about what we consider sports from start to finish in a world where surfing and climbing and things at the Olympics are getting more viewers for those parts than maybe the modern pentathlon or fencing or whatever else is in the Olympics. And so sport is at a tipping point. And what I tried to do in the book is say, well, look, there's so many opportunities from this, in particular with generational change and disillusion with some traditional bastions like politics and corporates and the media. Sport is at the tipping point of a massive opportunity, hence how sport can reboot our future. It's a book that paints a picture for the opportunity that we have through sport to mold and change and shape our society to be something more productive and constructive.
Great. Now, as someone mentioned there, I can't wait to read it. I started already reading parts of it. There's summaries available already on Google, but I'll get one for sure. Actually, for anyone interested in the book, there is a link in the description of the video on both YouTube and on LinkedIn. So that will take you to Amazon. But also Matt told me that he's really, well, if there were questions coming in, and I see that we already had some, he will at the end pick the best one, the best question, and we'll award that person with a copy of the book. Is that correct, Matt?
That's correct. That's correct. I was stealing myself for the postage bill as we chat. That's good.
That's great. So I see already some more questions coming in. So don't be shy. Post your questions here. Matt will comment on those. I see already from Hakon there is a question, but I'll get to that in a minute. I just want to understand a bit more about the process of then writing the book. First, deciding that you're going to write the book. I imagine that the pandemic helped that kind of project. We had Michael Payne just a few weeks ago, who also released a book that he found the time to put together because of the pandemic. But tell us what the process was. I see that you have a co-author as well.
Yeah. So, well, firstly, the process. I'm lucky because I write quite quickly. So what I was able to do was sort of throw down in probably 7 or 8 days, roughly what I thought the structure of the book might look like, which was really what are the areas that I believe have untapped potential for sport. And I sort of went urban planning, education, climate change and the opportunities that come with that, actually. Social activism and athlete activism. So I kind of wrote them all down. I wrote a little piece on each one. And at that point, enlisted the help of a lady you can see at the bottom, a lady called Kerry Potter. So Kerry and I played football together. Well, I didn't play with her. I was her coach, actually, at university. And she's a journalist and quite late to sport. And I asked her to get involved because I didn't want the book to be almost a kind of manifesto for a sport-crazed individual that wasn't grounded in reality. And Kerry's background is not being sporty and not understanding necessarily the value that sport could bring. So she helped me balance it, both in terms of it being realistic, but also being something that carried a female voice as well as a male voice. So wrote 12,000 words-ish, got Kerry involved. And then what we did was we sort of tested our views. My views were quite superficial. We went and tested those with about 30 people from around the world of sport and entertainment to really understand the realities of each of those spaces. So, for example, we talked to doctors about prescribing activity rather than drugs and what works and what doesn't work. We talked to Michael Payne about where the future of sports, where he thought the Olympics were going. We talked to the president of the Drone Racing League about how those kind of new sports that start from scratch are reinventing the space. We talked to panels of 15, 16, 17-year-olds on their view of what was important to them in health and exercise. So we talked to all sorts of different. We talked to a lady who runs an organization called This Mum Runs, which focuses specifically on providing support for women after having kids to get back to being active. We spoke to a gentleman who set up an organization called Black Trail Runners, which is involved with trying to get ethnic minority groups, particular Black individuals in London sort of running, because actually there's no real crossover into physical activity in the UK like there should be. And so out of that, we came out with a really firm position on what we wanted the book to say. And actually the interviews were so good that we transcribed some of the interviews through the book. So it wasn't just my voice and Kerry's voice, but it was those experts' voices as well. And after lockdown, it was born. After the first lockdown, it was born.
Well, first of all, congratulations. That's your second book, right?
Yeah, that's right. So the first one was on the Olympics when it came to Britain. So about 10 years ago, similar in the sense that it was looking at the impact of the Olympic movement on Britain over the years and the way in which 2012 would influence it, as well as the Olympics as an agent of change, basically. So similar bases.
And that first one, did you write with your father?
Yeah, that's right. So I was in the process of setting up Two Circles, and we had the idea over a few beers, and it was too good not to do. And yet at the same time, I was quite time poor, and so Dad took the lead on sort of all the historical research, interviewed some Olympians from 1948 and all sorts. And then I kind of brought in the more modern perspective, and we sort of molded those two together. So I've had a co-author both times around, and I just think it's healthy in terms of challenging your own thinking, just like it is to have a co-founder of a business.
Right. I picked on I noticed a couple of chapters in the book that I wanted you to talk about. There was already a question about the pandemic, but basically how you and Two Circles navigated that. But there's a chapter in the book on how sport responded to the challenges of the pandemic. Can you maybe paint a picture for us?
Yeah, I guess there's a real hard distinction there between professional sport and grassroots sport, like what you and I were involved in. From a professional sport perspective, I think we all realise the role that actively being a fan and a supporter of sport played in our lives. There's an expression in English, you don't know what you've got till it's gone. That was definitely how it felt in the UK, at least, where you all of a sudden, when it's Saturday afternoon and there aren't any football matches to watch.
Yeah.
And so what happened in the UK was actually that the government prioritised getting sport back because of the impact that they noticed that it had on just general morale. And indeed, made some mistakes, but what they never ever stopped happening in the UK, and I know this is not the same around the world, was that they never once stopped anyone going for a run. They never once stopped anyone from on their own for a certain amount of time, but they recognised the benefit to mental health and happiness ultimately of getting outside and being active. And so whilst that was easier for some than others, it definitely had a sustained impact and benefit to in the UK. However, what is true in the UK is it's created a much bigger social divide. So those people who live in the countryside like me, or might be able to drop their kids off at school, or might live in quite a safe neighborhood, for them to go out running in the evening was perfectly doable. Yeah. But if you don't live in that kind of environment, if you live in a tower block in an urban environment and you're working between the ages times of 8 and 8, and as a female, maybe you don't feel safe in the evenings, that was not possible. And so what happened was that it made them more active, even more active during in particular when they're working from home. But those people who don't necessarily have the opportunities to play sport outdoors on their own, who might join a leisure centre gym or something, they really struggled. And so it created more of a schism in the UK from a participation perspective.
Right. Yeah. I think all over the place was very similar. Yeah. There are questions already from Hakon and from Amanda. Hakon, I hope I'm not destroying your name. But so just hang in there for a second. We're going to get to those questions. Before we do, Matt, there's another one that was very enticing, was about how will sport bring society together, I think, towards sort of the end. Maybe can you summarize that thought?
Yeah, sure. So I think there's always been a general sense that when times are challenging for any society or for a group of societies, that sport can play a cohesive role in terms of maybe letting us forget the day-to-day agendas that we hold and sort of gluing us somehow together. And I certainly think the Euros, the Olympic Games through the course of the summer just let us forget some of the divisions maybe that existed and pulled us together. You know, it's speaking as somebody in England, Britain, that of course have voted to come out of the European Union. It's slightly curious that we can be just as excited as we ever have been about the Ryder Cup playing in a European team, or just as excited as we ever have been about something as straightforward as taking part in the Euros, right? And it's interested in the various countries. So sport is something that sort of goes over the top of that. First thing. Second thing is there's a lot of research, and there's some great research by Edelman, the comms agency, that looks at trust. Okay, so it's and they look at trust. They say trust is a result of two things. So to trust an institution or trust a person, you need to be seen as both ethical and competent. Okay, so excuse me if I'm just scribbling quickly. So somebody who's seen as right now, you need to let me finish this drawing. Okay, so it's a little 2x2 grid. Just do that. Yeah. So you need to be both ethical and competent. Okay, and so what they found, but in particular in North America and Europe and UK right now, is that politicians are seen as neither ethical nor competent. I'm not saying it's right or it's wrong, but that's the perception of the public. Yeah, I'm not very good at writing, but now corporates, okay, companies like the Unilevers, the Procters and Gambles, the banks, whoever, are seen as very competent in what they do, but not that ethical.
Right.
Okay. And if you think about NGOs, you know, the UNESCOs, the UNICEFs, and so of this world. So the people that you would normally think, if you can't trust government and you can't trust corporates, who can you trust? Well, they're seen by the general public in a lot of Western markets. They're seen as very ethical, but not very competent and a bit inefficient. And so the problem is that there's actually nobody seen as both competent and ethical, particular for younger generations to place their trust in. And that is why right now we see professional sports people, LeBron James, Marcus Rashford, Megan Rapinoe, Emma Raducanu as of a week ago. That's why you see particularly younger generations looking for people to trust, and they say sports people are very competent at what they do, and those that they see as particularly ethical, they put a lot of trust in, and that allows them to be a social glue. So over the course of the pandemic here, the most effective campaigner to kind of meet some of these social divides was Marcus Rashford, plays the centre forward for Manchester United. Yeah, people put their trust in him in a way they don't trust our Prime Minister. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but that's the reality, and that's the social glue that sport can play.
That's the perception. So Abdul Basir Hendricks from South Africa in Cape Town loves the analogy. Well, there is just José Luis in Santos saying hello.
Hello
there is Samir in Brazil as well. Erica should be walking through this door soon. She's in Lisbon watching us on her way here. And Matt, I mean, I just look at the clock. This it flew by. We just got to an hour. Do you have a hard stop, or we can stay a little longer?
I'm good if anyone's interested still.
No, great, because I want to get to maybe just a couple of predictions, because your book has those 10 predictions that you mentioned to me before the live, and maybe we thought that we could give a couple of them, and then people can buy the book to know the others. And then there's maybe a couple of questions that I want to ask you regarding really focused on career, some advice. You mentioned that you interviewed so many people. Maybe you can share some advice there as well. And I'll go. There's two questions here, one from Amanda and one from Hakon, that I would like you to answer too. So maybe another 10, 15 minutes if you can stay.
That's cool. Yeah, no problem. So let's start with the predictions then.
Predictions, yeah.
As you say, there are 10 in the book, and it's always dangerous making predictions, right? But we try. I think if there's some of the ones I might share, one of them was some will do sports, but all will play. Some will do sports, but all will play. And what I mean by that is I spend a lot of time watching how my children engage with sport and exercise. And sometimes they love to play structured competitive sport like I grew up playing. They'll play a cricket match or a football match. But sometimes they just want to play. They want to go on Strava and try and draw a strange picture of their running route. They want to, they don't want to play a competitive Fortnite competition online. They just want to muck around in the unique universe that Fortnite has set up. They want to go and do parkour, just jump around in an urban environment. And when I was growing up, we had a lot of conversations in the pub in England saying, is darts a sport? Is snooker a sport? And being a sport was a badge of honor. It's not like that anymore for new generations. They just want to play. And so we need to think about that.
I think esports was pretty much responsible for breaking that barrier. There was, some 10 years ago, we spent years in that discussion. Is that a sport? Isn't, or it isn't? And now I think people don't care. They're here to stay. And
yeah, I agree.
Doesn't matter.
So two more. The first one of them was local sport for local people. What I mean by that is there will be, every country will have, we have some in the UK, very big professional sports teams chasing global audiences, right? And that's fine, as long as they make sure they can be compelling enough to global audiences that they can make their business model work, then good luck to them. But there will be a majority of sports teams and clubs, even if they're professional, that need to redefine their commercial models. And that for me means, in particular in the remit of climate change, means understanding how they can be more locally relevant. And so if you look at, for example, a lot of football clubs in the UK, they're starting to say, well, hang on, we're in the center of a town that's struggling, where shops are shutting, where younger generations don't want to stay because there's nothing fun to do and they're not interested in pubs. We have this asset. How do we make that a vibrant part of our community? Maybe we need to put a climbing wall on the side of the main stands. Maybe we need to think about putting a 3G pitch down and then letting other teams use it during the course of the week. Maybe we need to think about the fact that our gym that our players use is only actually used 3 or 4 hours during the day. Why don't we open it in the evenings? We have catering facilities the whole way around the stadium. Why don't we just open them up and turn them into little mini restaurants in the evenings? So this isn't a Real Madrid idea, but it might be an idea for a first or second or third division Spanish team. It certainly is over here, because they have a responsibility to be at the heart of their communities. In particular, when we're trying to redefine at the moment the way in which we build town centres that are relevant for new generations to want to stay. Because post-COVID, not many people want to hang around in the town centre as they're currently configured. And to take us into the conversation about careers, the last of the 10 predictions is that professional sport will finally become professional. And that takes us back round to where we started in the question about women's sport. You know, we will finally understand that, firstly, that the sports industry needs to be representative of the community it serves. And it can no longer be full of 45-year-old white men deciding what is good for ethnic minority audiences and building new sports in cricket, or it certainly can't be 85-90% male for any longer. But it also needs to be more diverse in the products it develops to reflect those audiences. Nobody owns cricket. Nobody owns football. Nobody has a divine right to say football always needs to be 11 players on a side on a pitch like this. If you want to create a format of football, do it. Nobody owns it. And that breaking down and democratizing, if you like, of football and all sports will be fundamental. Because if anyone's seen the movie Jerry Maguire with somebody saying, show me the money, like sport's been like that for too long. And things are changing quickly.
Right. Good predictions. Good predictions.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Well, if not.
Now, you wanted to have a segue to get into the careers discussion. So I think that's great. Before I go to some specifics, for people looking into entering career in sports now, where would you tell them to look at? Where do you think the opportunities are, and maybe what are the skills on demand?
Okay, so if you take the logic of my book to the next conclusion, you'd say then the growth opportunities and therefore where the hiring will be in sports will be at those crossover areas. So it will be about new sport products or events that are being developed to address the changing times in which we live. So sports agencies that represent athletes that take a very social conscience area. It will be new things like the Drone Racing League that are specifically built to address new demographies. It will be in new female sports products, so being part of the female event that comes with the 100 or UEFA Women's Champions League, because businesses invest in growth areas, and they are all growth areas. So there's new demographics, new genders, social change, and also the intersection between sport and health in particular. So health tech, so it will be in the Zooplas, the Fitbits, the Garmins, anything that kind of takes individual sporting activity and turns it into health. And it will be also in the climate, right? So new properties that specifically are carbon net contributing in terms of impacting on climate change. It will be in Formula E rather than Formula One, right? So because people hire for growth, that's the main thing. So what it won't be in is those events that are struggling to cope with the changes coming around the corner.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. For people entering the industry, now we're talking about that. So people are having sort of their first interviews and so on. You mentioned that you used to interview people every week.
Yeah, well, every day.
Or every day, actually, and hire maybe every week. So what advice would you give to candidates? I would say first, to get an interview, if they are applying for an agency, as Two Circles or anywhere else sort of in sport, any advice for them to get noticed and get that interview? And then a second tip, second advice for them to perform well at that interview?
All right. Okay. So I think the first thing I'd say is think about quality of application rather than quantity. So think about making a really focused, bespoke, tailored approach to 4 or 5 roles or 4 or 5 organizations you really rate, rather than making 40 applications in a very generic way. There were several people that I interviewed and actually gave jobs to at Two Circles whose CVs I probably wouldn't have taken through to interview. They'd just sent me a generic CV or a generic, but they'd already taken the time to understand my business, and whether it was just a one-pager with their initial thoughts was branded up, or whether it was, I think what other people did that was interesting. Somehow just showing they'd made the effort, seeing me at a conference, for example, and just saying, look, I saw you wrote this. I read this article too that related to it. I printed it out just because I thought you might be interested. Here you go. Just something that shows a bespoke effort and intent on the organization you're talking to. And that's particularly important because, to link the second of your questions, at Two Circles, we look for 4 things. Okay, whether we're looking to hire a managing director or an intern, we looked for an ability to grasp new things quickly. How do you prove that? Okay, so that you might prove that because your academics are good. You might prove that because you've been a professional tennis player. You might prove that because outside of university you set your own business up. Doesn't really matter how, but having that, I can grasp new things quickly. Don't forget, we were doing something very new for the industry and learning our proposition as we went. So we couldn't give anyone a manual to say, here's how to do your job for 3 years. And I don't think anyone in sport can give a manual right now. Everyone has to be able to learn quickly. So ability to learn things quickly, an analytic frame of mind. So that doesn't mean that you're a maths genius. It just means that you can, some sort of sense, you can process information and come up with a conclusion or come up with a thought. And some of the best, most analytic people have studied history, right? For that, it's just taking evidence and coming up with a conclusion. So ability to grasp things quickly, analytics, an intuitive understanding of the business of sport. So how can you prove that? What do I mean by that? Well, that you come home really tired on a Monday night, right? And you sort of switch the game on, whatever game it is, and there's 2 ways you can go. Most people will just, they're really tired, will look at a green screen and loads of coloured dots walking around on the green screen. But if you have that passion for the business of sport, you won't be able to help yourself but think, why is that stand empty? Why are those advertising hoardings in Chinese when this game is in England? Whatever it might be. And I think that's the only one of these things that's just innate. You either are genuinely interested in that stuff or you're not. It's kind of, you're asking yourself constantly, like, what's going on behind the scenes here? What's the commerce story, the business story behind this? So grasp new things quickly, analytics, intuitive understanding of the business of sport. And the 4th one that's by far the most important is emotional intelligence. So, not only that you have all those skills, but you have that special ability to read a room and be able to persuade and convey your opinion in a really clear and gentle and emotionally intelligent way. So, for example, to test that, in the meeting room, in the interview, I'd often change my body language. So I'd go from sort of very interested and engaged, things like that, and then just sort of slump back. And and notice whether the person I was interviewing could react to that. Notice whether they asked me any questions at all. Were they trying to be interviewed and trying to be one way, or were they involved in a conversation? Were they smiling? Did they look interested in me as well as me being interested in them? So that's quite hard. It's quite hard to interview for, but you get used to it.
Awesome. I think this is a great insight.
You started leaning forward. Good to see you.
Sorry?
You started leaning forward then. Good to see you.
Indeed. Thanks for that, Matt. So I promise we have just a couple of questions from the audience. Before, let me give a shout out to Lourdes Norton in Miami. Another comment here from Katrina. She loves the Women's Sport Visibility Report, two circles released this year. Highly recommend to all listeners. Thank you, Katrina, for the advice. I'm very happy that Hakon said that I'm pronouncing his name well, so I'm glad. So I'm going to go to his question here to you, back up there. So what is your opinion? Well, what in your opinion are the primary benefits of the sports crypto space, fan tokens and NFTs for rights holders in terms of fan engagement? And how can they leverage the data coming from this embryonic sector? The one.
So that's a great question, not very easy to answer, which means it's a very good. I think the hard truth of the sports industry is it hasn't yet worked out how to do a decent job of gaming, which has been a challenge in terms of how you morph together FIFA and the World Cup, like FIFA Electronics, EA's FIFA with the World Cup in a meaningful way. It's nowhere near that yet. And frankly, the e-games sector is the complete Wild West commercially still. There are a lot of organizations running around making no money, not particularly well run, causing chaos and not delivering value. And I slightly fear that the NFT space will be a little bit like that for a while. So it'll be the Wild West, and some of those organizations that are being set up believing they can create them for clubs and teams and leagues will similarly be badly run, badly marshaled, not deliver on their promises. So I think in truth, it's very immature. I'm not sure it will add much in terms of in data value to rights holders, because I think the rights holders already know the hardcore fans pretty well, going to be the ones bidding for NFTs and things. But what you do tend to find is, in particular in North America, there is unbelievable value. The fan base is so big, the hardcore that are into high-end signed trading cards, for example, it is a micro industry that's doing very, very well. And my bet would be that it will be those organizations that know how to monetize that. So I noticed, I think it was today, that Topps are getting increasingly involved in the NFT space. And my bet will be, if I was investing in the NFT space or a rights holder looking to where I could generate value, I'd be partnering with organizations like that to make the best of it. You know, some of them worry me a bit.
It's funny because, I mean, that collector space was probably the first craze within NFT, and with the NBA clips and all that. But I think many argue that that's just a really small piece of, you know, everything that can be involved in it. And you're talking about probably the contracts in blockchain. And nowadays, where I'm from in Brazil, we already have clubs, kind of selling the rights to players via blockchains, or you have tokens. So if you negotiate that contract, you have part of the contract or something like that. But then now you have to check with FIFA if that's third-party ownership. So that's going to get complicated.
That's the other bit of this that worries me, because there's a fine line between NFT ownership and third-party ownership of players. And football in Europe is scarred by that. The latest unofficial partner podcast, actually, if anyone wants to listen to it, with the owner of I forget the name of the private equity firm that owns 4 or 5 clubs in Europe. I mean, it's a mess, frankly, that third party ownership space, and could be a real scar on football for the next foreseeable future. So, yeah, I mean, I can see the opportunity, but if I was advising a rights holder, like in a lot of spaces, I'd be saying, look, don't take the fast buck, watch a little bit. If you're going to test something, test it with a reputable company, for example, from the trading card space, and just watch and learn for 18 months rather than taking the fast buck.
Right. And lastly, here there's that comment. Not sure if that's a question or a comment, but maybe you can comment on that, by Amanda, who's living in Paris. As a woman, I'm struggling to find a company. My master's degree requires a work-linked training, which is hard to find in Paris. Important connections required, even if I have my many volunteer experience in international sports organizations. Any advice for her there? Have you been to Paris? Because you one of the languages you studied was French, right? German and French.
Yeah, that's right. French was the one that I spoke like a footballer. Frankly, the advice I would give is get in touch with Matt Cutler at Two Circles and Clément Bacouillet, who's kind of leads the line for Two Circles in France. I saw something on LinkedIn today that they're looking for some French language capability to help on the comm side of things for the next foreseeable future. I think they've got a big project launching over there. And Two Circles are increasingly invested in making France work, in particular Rugby World Cup, the Olympics, and so on. So get in touch with those two and tell them I sent you. Did mention that.
There you go, Amanda. But I was going to say to Amanda that is watching us, make sure you follow his advice of just 5 minutes ago. Do the research. Just don't send a CV that you send everywhere. Make the research. Be sure that you'll impress them. And just by knowing that you're watching this, I think will be a good point.
Yeah, if you connect with me on LinkedIn and then send them a message on Matt Cutler's LinkedIn feed that copies me in, I'll give him a nudge for you.
Well, that's very generous of you, Matt. I think this is we got to the end. I don't know. Do you have anything in particular that you would like to award a book to, or you want me just to draw one by chance?
I'm just having a quick look back through the questions. I think the best thing to do is, tell you what, if you put everyone, if you can tell from your analytics, everyone who's lasted 1 hour and 23 minutes. So if you give the book on to the person who's had the longest tenure since the start of the conversation and has also engaged somehow in the session, then I think that's a fair way to do it.
That sounds very fair to me. I will have to look at it later on. But I can see, let me see, whoever posts the first comments there and is still here, if you want to put your name in the list again. So I'm going to go backwards, and whoever is there is going to get a new book. So good idea, Matt. Before we go, last ones. This is the kind of questions that I ask everyone that comes here. Really try to promote, books and authors. Believe in it. I think it's, the best way for us to learn anything. And so I would like you to recommend a book of someone else. We already recommended all the players before, but and maybe a podcast or YouTube channel, anything that you'd like to recommend in that space.
So I'll stick to books. Us authors have got to stick together. I'll go for that one. There's a book called Players by a guy called Matthew Futterman, and if I'm going to put them together for reasons I'll explain. If this book is about that book's about where sports going. That's about where it's come from. So it's a story about how the sports marketing industry started with IMG and moved forward over the next 30, 40 years. And having studied quite a lot of history, you don't really know where the world's going unless you know where it's been from, unless you understand where it's come from. So I'd like to believe that if you read that, it's pretty difficult back front. If you read Players and then you read mine, you'd have a pretty good sense of an industry that we all care a lot about. So that's that. Players by Matthew Futterman.
That's great. Any podcasts that you'd like to recommend as well?
So Unofficial Partner run a really good podcast series. And the latest one on private equity in sport is very good. If you're interested in the business skills, then I run one with Sports Pro called the Playbook Podcast. That's also worth a listen if you're interested in skills for sports. So leadership skills, management skills, accounting skills, people skills. And there's a very good one in the back catalogue about diversity with Claire, the diversity lead for Vodafone, which is terrific. So if I were going to recommend one of them, that would be it.
That's great. Matt, thank you so much. So what I'm going to do is I'll let people still, if they can leave their names here, if they're still here, and then I'm going to check back who was the first of those people to comment, and I'll contact them, and I'll make sure that they get a book. I want to thank you so much for your time. We exceeded. I think this was the longest podcast or show that I did.
Sorry,
it really flew by, and that was great. I want to thank everybody that was with us as well.
Thanks ever so much, everyone, for your time, and feel free to LinkedIn, get in touch on LinkedIn. And those of you who buy a copy of the book, I hope you enjoy it. And those of you who don't, I wish you all the best, no matter what, with whatever happens next in your careers.
That's great. That's great. Thank you, Matt. Just stay there. Don't go anywhere. I'll come back to you in 20 seconds. Bye-bye, everyone.